All right. So the motivation for why do we look at peat fires? And it's twofold. One is, of course, relevance. And when we have a look at the big picture, and in the top right, you see here the time series of the global combustion of carbon from GFAT4S and GFAS. Then you can see that the biggest peak of monthly emissions were in 1997, and those were peat fires in Southeast Asia. So they do have a potential to have extreme emission events. And of course, emissions from peat fires are not reversible since the peat grows on such long time scales. So therefore, it's important for our system. It's important in the context of climate change, since peat is really present on all continents. And then when you look at climate change with increasing droughts, thawing permafrost, and land cover changes, those are then and will be enabling more peat fires to come in the future. The other question why it's important is this uncertainty, and this is, I think, the most shared figure from Christine's nice paper here, this overview of the different emission inventories. And when you look at the biggest difference between all of them, it's the ammonia in GFAS here, and that is due to the treatment of the peat fires in Southeast Asia and the emission factors that are being in GFAS. So it has a high uncertainty. It's relevant, it has a high uncertainty, so we want to look at it. Where does the uncertainty come from? When you look at the observations, you go from observations to combustion rate. The observations of burnt area in the global observing system, they don't see the burn depth of the peat fires. You can see the burnt area, but you don't know whether it's been burning 10 centimeters into the ground or 30, and you have to make an assumption on that. And I believe with some radar applications, you can make some headways now on this, but generally it's not being used. When you look at the observations of fire radiative power, the peat fires have low fire radiative power. That's due to them being in the ground, having a low fire temperature, and even more so the temperature being shielded by the surface. And this implies a weak infrared signal. Therefore, we see a low signal, and many of the fires are below the detection threshold. And even if they are detected, then we need to have a very large scaling factor to convert the peat, the FRP, to the dry matter combustion rate or to the emissions. And you see that on the right here for different land cover types in GFAS. We have the modus FRE over the GFAT3 dry matter. And you see that for the peat land cover type, there's a very steep curve here. So it's a large proportionality factor, which we have to apply, and that then amplifies errors in the observations. And for both burnt area and FRP, peat fires are co-located with above ground fires, and that ties into the question we've just been discussing. Is the modified combustion efficiency for the entire pixel, or is it for part of the pixel? And we have to distinguish between the different treatments, even in the same grid cell or pixel, for the fires in the ground and above. If you look at the emission factors, these are peat emission factors for 4 different species from 4 different inventories or compilations. And basically, they don't vary so much with carbon. When you look at carbon monoxide, and then for organic carbon, it's sort of converging onto the larger values in the later years. For the ammonia, it's converging on the lower values, and the methane is sort of in a rather narrow range since Akagi. But you see the value of 20 here. That's one factor why GFAS was so big in the comparison in the FIN paper. When you look at where do we have the information from peat? So we have the uncertainties. How can we treat it? Of course, the first information we get is a peat map. And here 4 different peat maps that I found, and on the right hand side you can see the coverage which we have in GFAS. At the top, that's the current version, and you see we've got peat in Southeast Asia sparsely in red here, and peat in Siberia sparsely in red here. And then in the current development version, we now have an improved peat land cover map, and we have for the peat, it still is in Southeast Asia, it's only very localized, and it's since it's a higher resolution here, and you see the larger areas in Siberia, and now we also have peat in North America, South America, and even Africa in the red color here. So that's better information that we will have in GFAS. What else do we have? When we look at the observations of fires now, you will remember we have the fire diurnal cycle. We generally, so this is from an old publication by the group of Martin Wooster, and you see the daily diurnal cycle of FRP and of pixel counts in over South America at the bottom and over North America at the top. And it's just to remember that in savanna and open landscapes, there's a fairly regular, strong diurnal cycle, whereas in intense forest fires, it's more irregular, and in the intense forest fires, it's a weaker diurnal cycle. And now the question is, what does peat have in terms of diurnal cycle? And we've been looking at this from fire radiative power from MODIS. And here you see an integration over a region east of Moscow, which burned heavily in 2010. And in red, you can see the daytime FRP from MODIS, and in blue, the nighttime observed FRP from MODIS. And this fire event, you can see when it started, only the daytime was elevated. And you can interpret this as above ground fires. Whereas when it got really strong and persistent, you see that the nighttime is elevated as much as the daytime. So really you see peat fires have got a flat diurnal cycle, and we can see from this behavior that it's actually peat fires. If we look at this a bit more quantitatively, in GFAS we do separate daytime and nighttime FRP and keep track of those individually. And then we can, of course, say with the previous assumption, okay, in a grid cell where there's peat, we say everything is peat. That's the standard approach. If I have FRP in a grid cell with peat, I apply the peat conversion factor and the peat emission factor. But of course, that's wrong. From the understanding of the fire with the flat diurnal cycle, you could say, okay, the nighttime level, that's due to peat fires, and the daytime level of the FRP is due to surface fires. So we've been looking at this in a bit more detail, and in the top plot here, we have annual values of carbon flux over Southeast Asia as the black curve, and then in the red symbols, there's an estimate of the contribution of peat to these emissions.
Johannes, sorry, hold on. In the room, we lost the connection to the audio again.
Okay. Let me know when I should continue.
Okay, can you try speaking and we'll see if the room can hear you?
Okay. Yes, 1, 2, 3. Have you seen this slide?
Yeah, we can see this slide and we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, you can continue.
And you can hear me. Okay. Have you seen this slide, or shall I do it again?
We were at this slide. Maybe go back 20 seconds.
Okay. All right. Okay. So basically, we keep track of the nighttime level of FRP and the daytime level of FRP, and then we use our land cover map. And when the grid cell says it's a peat land cover, then we interpret all the FRP as peat fires. But from the understanding that peat has a flat diurnal cycle, it's probably more realistic to assume that only the nighttime level is due to peat fires, and then the elevation at daytime above that is due to surface fires. So we've been trying to see whether we can do quantitative headway with this assumption. And we've been looking at, on the top plot here, Southeast Asia, and you see a time series of annual values in black of the carbon flux from fires in Southeast Asia, and then you can see the El Nino drought events with elevated emissions. And in the red symbols are two different estimates of the contribution of peat to these regional fires. And the squares come from the peat map. So basically it says here in 2015, 80% of the emissions come from grid cells that are identified as peat grid cells, and with consistently calculated emissions. And in triangles, we've done the assumption on each grid cell independently of the peat map, which I did in the previous slide, and said, okay, everything that's at the level of the nighttime FRP is from peat. And you see that they correspond fairly well with and are consistent, these two different methods of estimating how much peat fires we got. And you also see that during the El Nino years, when the fires are bad, their contribution from peat is elevated. However, probably during the non-El Nino years, these levels are too high. We don't believe that during a normalish year, 40% of the emissions really come from peat fires. So it's a mixed result there with this approach. And then we've been doing the same for the Arctic. And you see the two high fire years in the Arctic in the black curve. But you see from analyzing the diurnal cycle, we get an estimate that almost everything is peat fires. And of course, that's completely unrealistic. And the underlying reason is that in summer in the Arctic, the diurnal cycle in the weather isn't so strong. So you don't really get this effect of the diurnal cycle of the fires, and you attribute too much to peat fires. And so it really, just looking at the diurnal cycle isn't enough. What we do need is additional information. And here, thank you very much for Yun for the introduction. Here's my take on the temperature and the modified combustion efficiency. These are plots from actually gas flaring, which is a bit more, where the signal is a bit clearer. What we're doing is on the x-axis, you've got the wavelength in micrometers. So the visible is just the very first bit of it. And in red symbols are observations of 5 channels of Sentinel-3 SLSTR instrument at nighttime. And we have an algorithm to determine gas flaring from that by superimposing 2 Planck curves, where the green curve represents the background temperature of the surface, and the red curve represents the Planck curve of the hot source with 1 temperature. And and then the model is just the addition of the 2, that's the sum in every wavelength. And then you can see, and then with the 5 channels, you can do a fit, and you can actually retrieve the temperature of the background, the area of the hot source, and the temperature of the hot source. And you see in these 2 cases, the temperature is 1600 Kelvin and 1000 Kelvin. But in the lower part, the area is much, much larger by 2 orders of magnitude. But the effect of the temperature is that the maximum of the Planck curve gets shifted. The hotter, the more to the shortwave, and then you get a larger degree of radiation, more radiation in the visible. And that's exactly what Yun talked about in the previous talk. And when it's cooler, the fraction of radiation in the visible gets smaller. So just from these 2 pieces of information, then you can say, depending on how many channels you have in your instrument that you can analyze, you can say, okay, we superimpose 2 Planck curves like it's done here, or maybe we can do even 3, then we could have an estimate of 2 different fires with different temperatures. But that's sort of the physical background why looking at the visible radiation will give us for the information on the temperature of the fire, and thus information on the whether it's flaming or smoldering, and thus on the modified combustion efficiency. And I actually asked a student of Jun for a slide on the filter product, which he just introduced. And my understanding really is what we get from the observations is this fraction of visible energy. And then we see empirically that this corresponds very well to the modified combustion efficiency, which is where GFET is assumed to be the best reference, the best estimate of the truth. And there are 2 aspects in here. The peat fires have the lowest value by far of this visible energy fraction. So they should really be able to identify them nicely with this new product. But the not so good news, which I understood from reading the paper by Meng Zheng, is that this product is only available during nighttime. And of course, the reason is that the visible energy fraction during daytime is dominated by the solar radiation. So we only get this information at nighttime and not at daytime. And please correct me if I'm wrong. But so we have different pieces of information now on the peat fires. And my idea is what we could do in the future to combine them basically could be a 3-step algorithm, where first we say, okay, we only analyze pixels where we know there is peat from the peat map. Where there's no peat, there's no peat, there's no peat fire. In the second step, we could then look if there is a fire on a peat grid cell, is it a peat fire? And we can identify peat fires by their nighttime modified combustion efficiency or visible light fraction or temperature, which all transform one into the other. And then if we've identified peat fires, then we could go ahead and look at the diurnal cycle of the FRP and say, okay, the nighttime FRP is really due to peat fires, and everything that goes above is due to surface fires. And of course, in the Arctic, we might still have a problem. But that would sort of be my vision for where we could go with peat fires in the future. And it's really good that that's extremely timely that we have this product on the nighttime modified combustion efficiency here. And basically, that's all that I wanted to say. So peat fires can be dominating extreme events and are likely to become more abundant in a changing climate. We basically have 3 different ways to identify peat fires: the peat maps, the observed temperature of the fire or visible energy fraction, and then the diurnal cycle of the fire radiative power. And using those, it should be possible to get a fairly reliable identification of peat fires. And then for the quantification, you can use those, or you can also blend in the burnt area. But I think we will need to really combine all of the 3 in order to make a reliable estimate for peat fires in the future. That's it. Thank you. And I hope you still heard me. But I can't hear you anymore.
Online was all fine, Johannes. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Mikhail.
Yeah, we could
Go ahead and say again, because I thought I unmuted.
Thank you for such an insightful lecture. Now the floor is open for question. Is there any question in the room?
Could I make a comment?
Please. Yes,
yeah,
please do.
Yeah, Jonathan, I really enjoy your talk. I think you're tackling a very challenging problem. Is the attribution of the fire emissions by different ecosystems, right? I think the nighttime MCE, where we think that peat fire were likely to contribute a lot, can help. I'm just curious. You showed a map on the peat biomass fraction, and I find in South America you actually find a lot. I'm just curious. I want actually to learn a little bit here. From my understanding, when you're using optical immersion sensing to do the surface classification, you only see most times the top layer of the canopy, but the peat are really underneath some of the trees and all that. How do you have any idea or any thoughts of, do you have any, I want to learn something here. How do we detect the peat from the daytime visible imagery? Because you are covered by trees. So those maps, how do they do
that? Frankly, I haven't looked too deep into this. One of the maps is using machine learning, so I don't know how much we understand it, but I would guess it's very much in situ, and then probably when you have in situ observations, then you can use the machine learning or but I'm not sure which algorithm you use other than machine learning, how they did it. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. I'm just curious. I think that maybe have a huge answer on its source. Is that the fraction of the peat fire from this data, which I don't think you can based upon the physics to retrieve that from the space in on optical immersion sensing.
No, I wouldn't think so either. Actually, what one conclusion of this UNEP report also is that likely there are more peat areas than they have in their map here. And also the source of information is quite different in the Canada and North America, and Europe. You get percentage peat cover even in small grid cells. Whereas in other areas like Africa or Siberia, usually you just get a flag, this is peat. And you don't get this information about subgrid cell mosaics or fractions. So it's still rather heterogeneous information.
Thank you.